Greetings and welcome to the Voices Listed podcast show with Dr. PMak. As always, I'm excited to welcome guests to the show who are doing amazing work in their community, in the world around them. And each time I have these conversations, I leave feeling this sense of hope, renewed hope in humanity, renewed hope in where we're going as a people. And so today, I'm really excited for you all to join me in this conversation with Amaka Amadike, who is an early childhood professional with over 20 years experience, and she's working as a faculty member at Bow Valley College in Calgary, Alberta, and really excited to hear her insights about culturally responsive learning, as well as, the importance of kindness and compassion and collaboration in order to advance and leave this world a better place. Join me today on Voices Listed podcast with Dr. PMak. We were just talking earlier on about just how busy we get, right? And that sometimes we practice self-care. Well, we preach about self-care and talking to people about, hey, take time to walk. So how have you been practicing that?
Oh, Patrick, thank you for that. But no,
Yeah.
I think it's something that we talk a lot when
Yeah.
you talk to people.
Yeah.
But in reality, Patrick, that is really difficult to get there. We get so busy, sometimes I just don't get there. I'm gonna be honest. I tried. I started Pilates.
Oh, nice.
Yes, I said yes. I'm gonna go get it done. Just to get my feet moving. But it didn't last very long.
Now, my listeners will need to know this, that we've tried to have this podcast recording over 3 times, and we've just not been able to connect because of schedules and busyness and all of that. And I know our time together is also limited because you've got another upcoming engagement. But Amaka, in my research, you noticed that you have over 20 years experience working within the early childhood and education sector. Tell me, what drew your interest into the field?
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, thank you for that question, but that's one that I really have to go way back. So we started in Europe. We moved over here from Ireland, and back in the days, when I had my first son, just like anybody, when you're coming from Africa, you have to go to school to somehow package yourself better for the market. And so I was in school at the time, and we had my son in a daycare. And so one day I went to pick him up because the daycare was just by the school. And so I went to pick my son up, and they had him on a high chair. And so she was telling me, one of the educators was telling me that he doesn't understand English. And I'm like, okay, so because of that, then what? Right? So I didn't like the, what I was hearing. I just found that quite discriminatory, if you will. Right? And so at that moment, my mind started to shift. Now, how are they actually taking care of my kid when I am not there? Because that really fronted for me this whole idea of our being in a foreign country and how we are always, how we are treated all the time. But for the little guy, he doesn't know anything, and who knows what he's been going through. And so that really got me going into this field. And so while I was in Ireland, I was working with children with autism, because that's where my interest, kind of started. And so I decided when we moved to Canada that I'm going to continue in that line, which I did. But then, at some point I decided, again, when you're in a new country, you and your husband, sometimes it's quite difficult to make ends meet. So we have to go opposite of each other, right? So he would work in the evenings and I'll work during the day. So I opened up a day home, right? And so having a day home gave me that opportunity to take care of my children as well as, get income coming. And so that's how I started here in Canada. So we did that for so many years, and of course, I had to go back to school to begin to get the certifications to be able to actually practice better and know what's in the field here in Calgary. And so that was what I did. So I did my diploma, added to what I already had before. And so, yeah, that was kind of my foot in the childcare. But what really sparked my interest was my son's treatment, back in that daycare in Dublin. So here I am so many years later. My son is 26 years now.
Wow.
So yes,
That's very interesting. And, as you speak, I begin to think about even some of the things that, have inspired, many of, at least my social entrepreneur journey, right?
Yeah.
That it's personal that becomes the professional, right? It's these encounters that affect us at a personal level that we find ways to segue into the professional. And that's interesting. And so you're being humble, right? You say, well, and then did certification. My listeners, Amaka is an incredible human being. She says she considers herself a lifelong learner, but she has dual bachelor's degrees in early childhood studies and human services. And you do have a dual degrees, master's degrees in child youth studies, and open digital and distance education. So that's just not, well, I then decided to, being humble, right? I decided to do certification. Now, you hold dual master's degrees in very unique fields, right? How do you see child and youth studies intersecting with open digital and distance education? What approaches have you discovered through this interdisciplinary sort of perspective?
Yeah, it is really interesting, because when I wanted to do my first master's degree, which is in child and youth studies, I was like, I already have my bachelor's degree in early childhood studies. So, kind of continue in that line and take it more than children children over 6 years, right? So that was what we did. But I started to, talk to, because I also teach. As you know, I teach in the field. And so when I'm teaching, when I'm instructing, it's always going over for me, right? It's not just about the early years. You have to look at the whole picture, right? From early years when we know that the brains are forming, and then we take it even to the child and, the adolescent and things like that. And so it became more appealing for me, if you will. And so taking on my second master's degree in open distance and digital education, for me, just like an African woman, I'm already thinking, oh my goodness, how long am I going to be in this field? I have to think about my retirement, right? And so I began to think, I already teach hybrid, right? So I teach a lot of my courses online, or asynchronous, and some of my courses are in person. And so learning a lot of, because I majored in leadership, right? So and this is where it becomes a little bit more personal because of my own personal journey in the field, which hopefully we can get there, here in Alberta. You find out that you start to strive to get into that leadership position because you believe that that's where changes are going to begin to happen. And so when I thought about my second master's degree, I said, I think I would rather feel at ease being in my own home office and teaching these courses or doing consulting, and, kind of really impacting lives directly, instead of every day I have to get ready, all these 8 to 9 everyday shift wasn't going to be for me for a very long time. And so this is really me looking beyond where I am today and still looking at how I'm going to continue to make impact in this field, even when I'm retired. So,
thanks. That's interesting, an interesting interdisciplinary perspective, right? And so as a faculty member at Bow Valley College, right? This is where this is your home base.
That's correct.
As you work with, child and youth care workers, as you instruct, what do you see, how can I put this? What do you see as the critical skills, perhaps, and mindsets that are needed in today's early childhood development sector? Like, what do educators need to develop the most?
To answer your question directly, I think we need to be kind. We need to have empathy. These are really key areas for me. People will be like, oh, you have to be passionate. Of course, you have to be passionate. I take that as something that we have to have. But Patrick, look at the world that we are living in today. Look at what is going on, like, globally. And we need to get into ourselves and think that our one thing that we know we can always work on, which is relationship. But if you're not kind, it becomes very difficult to be able to build that relationship, because there's a lot of hate messages that we have today. And why it bothers me is when people who are stereotypes, who are really on that end of the spectrum, when they hear all these things they hear and they want to act it out, guess who is the victim? The vulnerable. The children, right? And so when you're not kind, it becomes a lot of, for me, it's a problem. It becomes problematic.
Very, very interesting, right? Because I mean, you touch to the core of my own personal philosophy, right? And as you know, I have a consulting firm called Ubuntu Consulting, and Ubuntu really stems off from both my culture, from the Shona word Uhunu, right, which means manners and values and respect, to from the Zulu word Ubuntu, loosely translated, I am because we are, right? And so Ubuntu for me is sort of this nebulous concept that means that you have to be kind, you have to be empathetic, you have to center humanity, you have compassion, right? And a lot of that has been missing, right? And you rightly pointed out that in this poly crisis that we're living in, right, with wars, with tariffs and all these things that are coming in, and people grappling to know where to and how to center themselves, it's so interesting that the number one answer you give me is kindness and empathy. Right. And particularly, well, I was asking you in the context of early childhood educators. But I feel that as you speak about that, yes, parents are children's first teachers, right? But then as we get into the classroom too, the educators play quite a critical role in modeling kindness, in modeling humanity, in modeling empathy and respect. And so with that in mind, you have worked extensively, Amaka. In fact, Amaka, I met you a little, just around a year ago, right, at an international conference in Vancouver, and
That's
we
correct.
then just started talking about the work that we were doing in community, and I was really impressed by how you have been working in Calgary, Alberta, particularly working within the context of the Indigenous early childhood education and care framework. Can you share with us what has been, maybe one or two, what has been the most transformative moments that have highlighted to you the importance of culturally responsive teaching, right? So you speak to us, I mean, you share with us that when you're in Ireland, in Dublin, your son went through this experience, and this is how you got yourself into this field.
Correct.
So over the course of the 20 plus years you've been in the field, what has been the most transformative highlights, if maybe one or two?
Yes. So thinking about what I've, gone through all these years and what has really stood up for me, it is the fact that as we are today, it's still difficult to think about culture as a separate thing, in this field. Someone could say, well, but Canada is so diverse, and you will think that all the programs, all the early childhood, programs will be that diverse in their environment. You think that the environment will reflect the diversity that it kind of has, but that isn't. And so this is one thing that has really, really taken me to a different height, which is why I also work with ARC. I don't know if you know about ARC, it's called the Alberta Resource Center for Quality Enhancement. So I work as a project coordinator for a program that they call Creating Cultural Connections. And so this is really a place that I feel I am happy working with, because I'm trying to work on those areas that in my head has been missing for so many years. I can't tell you if, that it is great, but we are making progress. I'm just going to leave it at that. There are still some challenges around that. And then my second will be really look through the Indigenous ways. You're thinking about land-based education. And you and I know that coming from where we come from, these things are natural to us, but a lot of people don't understand the connection that we have to the land in this place. And so being grounded for me is another area that has really wowed me, or I can highlight as part of the things that is still keeping me going. Because I work, like you said, I work with some Indigenous friends and elders, and so I keep learning as I go. And this is something that still grounds me. Understanding that land-based education is just us really respecting the land as is, and also teaching the children that we walk with how important it is that we, maintain or sustain this place that we live in.
It's interesting. Thank you for those two sort of transformative moments. And so I wanna lean more towards what you've just mentioned as the ARC framework, right? That really in Alberta that focuses on cultural awareness, right? I want to ask for practical strategies that educators can use. But then I felt that question, as it was forming in my head just now, would not do justice. So here's maybe let me think on my feet here. Here's a reframed question.
Okay.
What are practical strategies that listeners could use, right, to make sure that their communities are inclusive, their families are inclusive, the things that they spend time in are inclusive? So you mentioned that Canada is diverse, but then when you scratch deep down the barrel, you're like, no, it's not as accommodative, it's not as inclusive, it's not. So can you perhaps share with us broadly some strategies that families, communities, even educators could use to make this more inclusive?
Yeah, for sure. And so when in our field, when we talk about the four bigger, let's say, core areas that we want to cover, you think about space, you think about time, you think about participation, right? And you think about your environment. And so making the environment responsive enough to reflect the cultures, to reflect the diversity that we all have in the classroom, I think is a good place to start. Because what I've seen in my travels around Southern Alberta with this work with ARC is that I see a lot of programs that are, there's nothing that spells culture in it. And yes, they do have educators, they have families from really different cultural backgrounds that they could actually, use to step into that unknown area, if you will. And so what I say to them is, let's start with the people that we have in your program, right? Think about the families. Think about the children. How can you have an open conversation where you can say to them, come in and share who you are with us? Is there anything that you can bring to the center, right, that we could put somewhere that could reflect who you are?
Okay.
Right? Because a lot of the times they are making assumptions, and I mean real assumptions, and it doesn't end well. So I've given them this main tool, if you will, to always ask the parents, tell me more. Tell me about you. It's always about the other person and not about what you think as an educator. So I think if we could start relating to people that way, what you're doing is actually letting those families know that you value who they are, that you value the culture that they are bringing into your program. And that gives them that sense of belonging, that we are talking about. And that's just how relationship kind of begins. And that will also impact and even reflect on the children that are in there, right? So start with asking them, what is it that makes you you? right? And then go from there.
That speaks a lot into what you mentioned earlier on, right? About the importance of kindness and empathy. I making a presumption that you can be kind, or you can only be kind to a person that you know, right? In terms of that, you sort of dig deeper into sort of the cultural background of that particular person, and you begin to understand.
Yeah.
Well, in so many ways, we've seen, or I've seen, in my travels around Canada and in North America, people don't have time.
Yeah.
People don't have time to be culturally engaged or culturally immersed. What's your take on that, right? Is this a time thing, or is a personality thing, or is a thing that, you know, humanity needs to shift towards getting to know, making space for each other, getting to know each other, right? For example, I don't start my emails just by going directly into hello Amaka, can you please forward me this? That's, for me, is, from my culture, it's so insensitive, right? I have to check in on you because your well-being is inextricably linked to my well-being, right?
Exactly.
So good morning, Mama. How are you doing today? I hope your family is well, right? That's and then I've seen a lot of, you know, emails that come to me. I'm like, well, you know what? It was a pretty rough weekend. Thank you for asking. And they wouldn't have asked, right? Because how I then turn out and how I perform in a work situation is directly related to how I am doing, right? So any suggestions, any propositions to that particular issue?
So to your question, Patrick, I think it's a societal culture, you know? So the society has been shaped in a way that, you know, like when we started this conversation, it was, my goodness, we're so busy. We don't even have time to do anything. So I think that has become somehow the norm here. And checking on people somehow, you know, isn't as priority as it should be. And, you know, when you're thinking about culture as well, I think it's going to be societal issue as well as personal. It cannot be because I don't have time. We make time for whatever we want to make time for, right?
Can you repeat that, please? We do make time for what we need to make time for. That's so
correct.
That's
we do.
Yeah.
It's, even if it's like 10 minutes out of your day. To be like, I'm really going to sit my colleague down and ask them, tell me about your culture. Tell me what I need to do, right? To not step on your core values.
Or your core values.
Tell me what I need to say, because I don't want to say something that is wrong. Because one thing with me is, I always say to people, I would rather say something than say nothing. Right? So engage people and ask them, how do you want me to address this? And then go from there. So it's definitely not, it has to be personal in a way. And so
it's interesting, and sorry to cut you. It's interesting because since meeting you over a year ago, this has been a consistent quality of yours in our interactions. The curiosity that you bring to conversations, right? I think is again what, you know, when my my podcast team was asking, hey, who's our next guest? And, you know, I was like, oh, we need to reach out to Amaka, right? Because your curiosity drives just this notion of humanity. Like, no, she's not just not asking because she's asking because she's a deeper desire to connect with people. And so when I hear you speak about this, I have also experienced this for myself, right? That you ask questions because you're trying to get the clarity, you're trying to get the understanding, so that when you speak, you're not speaking out of turn. So thank you for that, sort of suggestion to listeners, to people, to viewers, that, just creating time. We make time for the things that matter, right? And so if connections and friendships matter, then we make time for them. That's amazing. That's so good. So I want to move a little bit towards your work as an advisory committee member of the Spark Initiative, right? Which again speaks about cultural responsiveness, right, in early learning environments. we live in very interesting times,
Yes.
right? And I know I want us to have a conversation with you about early childhood development and how you've been doing it in Alberta and in Calgary. But I'm going to speak quite broadly, and if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about cultural responsiveness, right? Yes, we can look at it through the lens of early learning environments. That's fantastic. But we have also spoken about this space, space, call it Canada, call it, the USA, call it,
Right.
wherever, people are listening in or watching from, right? What does it mean? And what does it take to truly create a sense of belonging? First, for our children, and then for community broadly. What does it take? What does it take?
Connections, Patrick. Connection. Authentic connection. Authentic.
Okay, so define that for me.
I'm going to dive a little bit deeper. In the world that we live today, I go back to that relationship building. You cannot say to yourself that, oh, I think I am friends with my neighbor, when you can't even open the door and say, hey, good morning. Right? So you have to start to cultivate that, that attitude of saying hello. First of all right?
Yeah.
And now when you are thinking about, oh, my next door neighbor is, she's from Nigeria. She's always out singing, because that's what I do, by the way. How do I connect with her?
Yeah.
Right? You could see me out there and you could be like, hey, Amaka, can we have, can you come in for tea? We're doing this or we're doing that. I think it starts to build from there. Now, in the field that I work with, which is, the most vulnerable within us, I always say to my students, like it's pointed out, I'm a very warm person. I'm just going to put it out there, right? And I love that connectivity. I want to relate to people. I want to get to the inside of who you are. It's not the surface. I go a lot deeper. And how do I do that? It's through this type of connection, through this type of interaction. That's how I get deeper. Sometimes my husband will be like, Amaka, no, you can't ask that. I'm like, why not? Why not? I'm asking because I really want to get it right. And so when we start from that end, then we move out. So talking about the Spark Guide, the culturally responsive early learning and childcare. So my first meet with them actually started through my work with ARC. So as the project coordinator for ARC, I was asked to become an advisory member committee with that the policy wise is the name that came up with the Spark Guide. And so I just went in there for the first time. We kind of chatted. I asked a lot of questions. And then the second time, they read through the Spark Guide then in the draft stage. And so I was listening to this. I was listening, they were reading, and it was so academic, Patrick, that I said, this is beautiful. I can handle it because I know I can. But let's stop for a moment and think about the end users. Who are the people that we are trying to get to with this guide? These are people that their level of education is quite low. So we want to not tone down the language, but we want to make it relatable.
Sure.
We need to build some story into it so that when they're reading it, it's not like they are reading this, big academic work thing. You want it to be relatable. And so they contacted me privately. And they said, hey, Amaka, we really enjoyed your conversations with us today. It was a lot of energy, as always. And so, and so they said, do you mind if we approach you as a storyteller for the Spark Guide? Would you be able to do that for us? And I'm like, definitely. Because growing up, you and I know, and I tell them the story that growing up, we, in the evening, after supper,
and this is growing up in Nigeria.
That's in Nigeria. That's correct. Yes. So my grandma, we will sit in a big circle, and she will use the little stool, and she will sit in the middle of all her grandchildren, and she tells us story. And so I grew up listening to a lot of oral storytelling.
Yeah.
And so I enjoy it. I love it. We have a lot of musicians as well that kind of, sing folk tale. It's storytelling, right? So when they approached me, I'm like, yeah, why not? And so when you look into the book itself, the Cultural Responsive Early Learning and Childcare, you're going to hear my stories, my childhood stories, as it got, they weave it into all the chapters there. And that was what was needed.
That's amazing.
To really get this book to the users. Because now they are reading it. They are relating, oh, Amaka looks like me. You know, again, that's where we talk about representation, right? So it was a powerful moment for me because I wasn't planning to be a part of this whole thing. But when they approached me, I'm like, why not?
Yeah, I gotta, dive in and be involved.
Yeah,
right?
Because a lot of people there need to hear that story.
So I'll come to the Spark guide and your work and the storytelling that you've done through that. I want to go back to the authentic relationships.
Right.
One would be listening and say, well, it's easy for you to say because you grew up in that environment or in that culture that fosters that.
Yes.
How would you respond to someone who says that to you?
Okay, so it's not about really where, of course, we know that the beginning of all these relationships starts from your childhood. How were you brought up? And just like any African, that we always grow up in a community. It's never one family raising you, right? Sure. So that community effort to raise a child really was what I say made me who I am today. Sometimes I get mad at my dad for being so, him. But today I look at that and I can see what he instilled in me. Okay. To be true to yourself, right? And so when you understand who you are, that's where it starts. Now you can project that to somebody else. So when we are talking about authenticity, I understand this for me. Therefore, I'm going to relate to this person based on that. So I have to be real. I don't need to fake it. I'm not going to tell them what they want to hear because I want to jump the next hoop or I want to get this or I want to gain that. That has never been me. And, it's that originality that brings that whole connection for me.
So would you argue that it's for those that don't have that? Is it something that's learned? Is it a skill that they can learn?
Definitely, yes. You could. You might not get to the level where it becomes part of who you are, but with being intentional, and this is what we preach in this field, there's a lot of intentionality in what we do because we're adults, because we're knowledgeable these days, right? And so we become intentional in what we speak. In what we say. If you know that if you say something is going to hurt the next person sitting next to you, then don't say it. Don't say it, right? So it starts with being intentional.
On the aspect of not saying it too, right, is makes me think about emotional intelligence.
Right. Okay, so let me not say it's not don't say it, but word it differently. Be kind.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't disagree with you saying don't say it because there are instances. So I've got my 3 questions that I ask myself, right? Every time I'm in a situation or I'm in conversation or even in this conversation, right? Actually, maybe 10 minutes ago, there was a moment that I actually said, beep, right? And the 3 questions are, does this need to be said?
Yeah.
Does this need to be said by me? Does this need to be said by me right now? Right. And so you talk about intentionality, right? And so in authentic relationships, using that part of your emotional intelligence to say, well, do I actually need to say this? As Amaka is speaking, I had a question 10 minutes ago. I was like, does this need to be said by me? Does this need to be said by me? Does it need to be said by me right now? No. I'll pick up an email, chat with her. Hey, when we're having this conversation, this sparked off, and I wanted to follow up on that, right? And so I don't disagree with you around the issue of, sometimes don't say it because by saying it, sometimes we tend to create more harm than, right? It takes more time to undo. Well, I actually didn't mean it this way. I actually meant, because everything said, everything written is that this, mercy of the interpretation of the person who's hearing that, the person who's hearing that, person who's receiving that, right?
Yes.
And so sometimes those things cannot be undone. So in order to avoid being into that space, don't even say it.
That's true, but I can also argue on the other end that there's something we call critical friend.
Yes.
Be that critical friend.
Yeah.
So again, be constructive in what you're asking them. Don't ask a question that is going to escalate things, right? Maybe look for the right time.
Yeah.
And that's again when I talked about space, time, participation, and environment. Look for the right time.
Are those your go-to?
Those are key. Those are key.
Okay. I love
those are key. So that time, look for that time when this person is a little bit in a better mood. Now we can have this discussion without yelling at each other. Right? It becomes a conversation. It becomes a dialogue instead of a fight. Right? Now everyone's emotion is down. You can listen actively, and you can also respond respectfully.
Okay. So, what advice would you give, not just to young professionals going into the child and youth care sector? What advice would you give to anyone who's passionate, perhaps, about creating meaningful, culturally responsive environments? What advice? Hey, focus on this and this and this.
Yeah. So be curious.
Way, just to give a precursor, like it's both and, right? It's just not me putting my culture in front. It's me also having to learn from other people, right? So just want to out there as a disclaimer, say this is, for me, this part of the conversation is not so much you, Amaka, enforcing down your cultural lens or cultural views on me, but that we are both learning and co-creating and co-constructing this body of knowledge. So what advice would you give to both young and even people that are listening? I'm like, hey, how do I create meaningful cultural experiences?
Yeah, so I go be curious, right? You have to have that curiosity in you and be open-minded to take it in. Yeah. Sometimes you might be curious, all right, but then you ask certain questions. You're like, nah, I'm not ready to hear that. And then you shut your door, right? But then when you're curious and you have that open mind, when the question starts, the response starts to come in, how do you process it? What do you do with it? Right. So I always say to my students, I said, you're going to meet a lot of people, families, even children. But I think the key there is to take time to understand them. You have to understand them in order to be able to work with them.
Okay.
Right. And someone could be like, but I have 6 children. I have 8 families. How am I going to do that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, we make time.
True.
You take your time, you learn these individuals, you take your time, you learn the families, because what happens is sometimes families come to pick up their children as an example, and maybe they don't have great English, right? And you're like, I'm not going to talk to that person because I'm not going to hear what they're saying. Their accent is so heavy. You are already building that barrier.
True.
Right? To connecting with these families right there. So I'll say be open when you walk into this field. Be kind. I know you're going to be passionate. I hope so. That for you to walk here, you have to have a lot of patience, because when we're working with children, you really need to be that person, that will calm them when they are up there, because we know what children can be like. But we also have to understand that this is child development, right? And whatever they're doing it at the right stage. They're not doing it because they don't like you as an educator. So that understanding also would help people that are coming into this field, because sometimes they are coming like, oh, well, this is easy. I'm just going to sit with children. No, it's a lot more than that.
Wow.
So being very understanding.
Amazing. That's amazing. Thanks for those nuggets, right? And so I have perhaps in my mind 1 or 2 questions that I ask you as we bring this to a wrap. Outside your professional role, right? And not just the roles that you play, because I know you, like
so many hats.
Oh my gosh, you got so many hats.
I know.
Outside all of those hats, you spoke about, as you were just digging back into the recesses of your memory, you're talking about, growing up and sitting around a circle and your grandmother sitting in the middle of that circle and sharing stories.
Yeah.
Could you perhaps share with us what childhood memory or experience do you have that continues to inspire your approach to work?
Oh, my goodness. Which one do I pick, Patrick? Because there's so many.
Oh my.
So I go back to that land-based education, really. And I remember as a child, right? We come back from school, you drop your school bag, you're out, right? You're in nature. You are plucking different types of fruits, the mango, the guava, like name them, right? And you're doing this with your family, with your friends. And so that relationship that we had growing up, you know, for me is still priceless. And so when I come into my workplace, you know, even when I was far back when I was a center director in early childhood program here in Calgary, one of the things that I brought into it was that spirit. You know, that playful spirit, still have it, because I think that's what really gets people, draw people to you. You know, I'll give you an example. I used to have, you know, young staff that I hired back then. And so my office sits in a place where every staff that is coming in have to go across my face.
Coming in, what time they're coming in. No.
Exactly.
Your bosses.
And so this young staff will be coming in and they just carry their bag and they will go past me and they don't say good morning. They say nothing and they walk past me and I'm looking at them. I'm like, my goodness, what am I going to do about this? Because I grew up in that space where you just relate to people, right? So I would start talking to them. I'll come out, hey, did you see me when you went past? And they'll be like, yeah. I'm like, do you know what I was doing? You know, I kind of start asking them questions. And they start to talk to me, right? And so I'll be like, you know, I just wanted to say good morning. That's it. And then I'm going to go back. The next day, they're coming to work. They're peeping through my window to see if I'm still there. Oh, good morning, Miss Amaka. So I got that going. So growing up in that little communal environment, if you will, I still carry that to my work today. And this is what I want to share with people that work in this field. You cannot be an island. You can't.
Yeah, I love it. That's a true embodiment of Ubuntu, the philosophy. I am because we are, right? That we are only as strong as the people that are around us. And so thank you for really capturing that well. And so I won't let you go before you answer my last question. The last question for you, Amaka, is if you could have dinner with anyone, past or present, 3 people, who would they be?
Oh, my Lord. Oh, my goodness. Who would that be? Can I choose from my own family? Because I would love to have one more dinner with my dad.
Oh, absolutely.
I would love that. Because he is, my dad is full of wisdom. He continued to guide me up until he passed 2 years ago. And so if I could have another chance to ask him some traditional questions that will continue to guide me, I would love that.
Oh, precious.
Secondly, who else? Maybe Nelson Mandela. Trust me. I love that guy. You know, thinking about his journey, what he endured, just for that goal that he had, I think is worth emulating. So yeah, I would want to get him out and have dinner with him if I could.
Okay.
Another living person that I could, I love Trevor. I love Trevor. Trevor is great. I was actually watching his interview last week with Chimamanda. And it was, yes, and it was brilliant. And so he is so intelligent that, and again, when you talk about intentionality, you know, he really has this way with words that really get you to begin to reflect, right, on a lot of things. And so, I think he would be my third person to dine with.
That's special. And Amaka Amadike, it's always absolutely wonderful to have conversations with you, whether we meet in person or we talk on the phone or we are exchanging emails. You bring in such a depth of curiosity, such a depth of empathy and understanding and connection. And so thank you for joining me and our listeners on this podcast show today, sharing your insights and perspectives about cultural responsiveness, cultural sensitivity, but beyond that, just talking about the importance of kindness, empathy, and compassion. Amaka, thank you so much for coming to the show today.
My pleasure, Patrick, and thank you so much for having me. And thanks for all the work that you do, by the way. I didn't get to say that. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you so much, Amaka.
All right.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Voices Listed podcast with Dr. PMak. I hope you enjoyed insights that came out of this conversation. Keep your notifications on. Our next episode will be dropping soon. Thank you and enjoy.